The night the world bled around me smelled like roasted garlic, expensive cologne, and fear. Though no one had realized it yet. Not until the first scream cut through the violins. I was refilling a glass of Chianti when the music died. The stem of the wine glass trembled between my fingers, the deep red liquid shivering like it knew something I didn't. Or maybe it was me who knew, because my body reacted before my mind did, that faint static in the air that always came before violence. A charge I could feel crawling under my skin, like an old, familiar lover I swore I'd left behind. La Maravilla was the kind of restaurant where power came to eat. Marble floors, golden chandeliers, linen so white it hurt the eyes, and laughter so forced you could taste the lies hiding behind every smile. The men who dined here didn't come for the pasta. They came to make deals that could buy lives or end them. And in the middle of it all sat him, Dante Moretti, the king of this city's underworld, the man everyone whispered about, but no one dared approach without trembling. That night, he looked like he always did. Dark suit, darker eyes, and that unnerving stillness of someone who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. He was seated at his usual table near the window, back to the wall. Strategic, always. 4 men flanked him, all silent, all scanning the room the way wolves watch the tree line. I'd worked here for 6 months, long enough to know the rhythm of the place, the ebb and flow of danger disguised as fine dining. But that night something in me was on edge. Maybe it was the man at table 9 who hadn't taken off his gloves. Maybe it was the way the hostess kept glancing toward the door. Or maybe it was the ghost of the girl I used to be whispering, "Get ready," in the back of my head. Then it happened. The double doors swung open, not the way they usually did, soft and slow, but hard enough to slam against the walls. 3 men walked in. No, not walked, stormed. Their coats were too heavy for the season, their eyes too sharp for guests, and in one breath, everything that had been elegant turned feral. The first gunshot shattered a wine bottle behind the bar. Screams followed, chairs toppled, and suddenly the air was filled with the metallic stench of blood and gunpowder. Someone yelled, "Get down!" and the musicians dove behind their instruments. My body didn't think. It moved. Years of suppression burned off in a single instant as muscle memory took over. I ducked behind a table, but not before I saw Dante rise. Calm, almost bored, like the devil himself had been waiting for an excuse to stand. His men drew their weapons, but the ambushers were already firing, bullets cracking through chandeliers, glass exploding into stars that rained down on the marble floor. One of Dante's guards fell, throat opened by a bullet that hadn't even had time to echo. The other men turned the restaurant into a war zone. And I broke the rule I'd been living by for 4 years, never reveal what you can do. I saw the man at my 10 o'clock lining up a shot at Dante, and before I even thought about it, I grabbed the steak knife from the table beside me, flipped it in my hand, and threw. The blade spun once, twice, and buried itself cleanly into the attacker's wrist. The gun fell, the man screamed, and for one heartbeat Dante's eyes snapped to mine across the chaos. They were black and unblinking, like he was staring through me and into the truth I'd been hiding. But the fight wasn't over. Another man was already raising his weapon. I slid across the floor, grabbed the fallen gun, and fired without hesitation. The shot was perfect. Center chest, quick and final. My ears rang, but my hands didn't shake. They never did. The silence that followed was the strangest kind. Half terror, half disbelief. Smoke curled lazily toward the ceiling, and broken glass glittered around Dante's shoes like diamonds. He lowered his gun, gaze fixed on me. The waitress who had just killed a man like it was muscle memory. When it was over, I stood among the wreckage of what used to be fine dining, surrounded by spilled wine that looked too much like blood. My apron was stained, my breath shallow, and everyone in the room stared at me as if I'd just changed gravity itself. Dante Moretti approached slowly, each step deliberate, controlled. The kind of walk that said I own everything I move toward. He stopped just close enough that I could smell the smoke on his jacket, the faint trace of whiskey and gun oil, the scent of power that was equal parts intoxicating and terrifying. "What's your name?" he asked. His voice was deep, quiet, more dangerous than a shout could ever be. "Elena," I said, though my throat felt raw. "Elena," he repeated, tasting it like a test. "You don't throw knives like a waitress." I wanted to lie, to shrug, to pretend it was luck. But those eyes, God, those eyes didn't let me. They were assessing, dissecting, memorizing. "I used to bartend in rough places," I managed. It wasn't even close to the truth. He tilted his head slightly, almost smiling. "Rough places don't teach precision like that." Behind him, his men were dragging the dead toward the back, covering blood with tablecloths, turning carnage back into business as usual. But Dante didn't look away from me, not once. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a lighter, flicked it open, and lit the cigarette between his lips with steady hands. "Sit," he said finally. "We need to talk." "I should call the police." He exhaled smoke and smiled faintly, like I'd told a joke he'd heard 100 times. "You really think the police come here, cara mia?" The word, my dear, slid off his tongue like honey laced with poison. He sat, gesturing to the seat across from him. My body was shaking now, the adrenaline burning off, the old instincts screaming at me, to run, to disappear before my past found me again. But there was something magnetic about the way he looked at me, something that pulled instead of pushed. So I sat. The restaurant was eerily quiet now. The only sounds the clinking of glasses being cleared and the faint hum of a ceiling fan trying to push away the smell of death. He studied me in silence for what felt like hours. Finally, he said, "You saved my life tonight, Elena. That makes you valuable." "I don't want to be valuable," I replied before I could stop myself. He laughed once, softly. No one ever does, until they realize what it costs not to be. Something in the way he said it made the air colder. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from something darker, something that felt like recognition. Because I knew that look in his eyes, the one that saw not just who you were, but what you could be weaponized into. I'd worn that same expression once, years ago, in a life I buried. But maybe you can't bury who you really are. Maybe fate has a cruel sense of humor. When I stood to leave, he caught my wrist. Not hard, but firm enough to make it clear I wouldn't go anywhere he didn't want me to. His fingers were warm against my skin. "Come to my office tomorrow," he said. "You'll tell me who trained you." "I'm not coming," I whispered. He smiled that slow, deliberate smile again. "You will." He let go, and I walked out into the rain, each drop hitting my face like punctuation to a story I thought I'd already finished. But I could feel it in my bones. This was only the beginning. Because Dante Moretti didn't make requests. He made inevitabilities. And somewhere deep inside me, the part I'd spent years killing had just opened its eyes again. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the restaurant again. White tablecloth soaked red, flickering candlelight glinting off shattered glass, the flash of gunfire mirrored in the eyes of men who had come to kill. I saw Dante's face too, carved from control and quiet violence, looking at me like he had seen a ghost he wanted to keep instead of exorcise. The rain outside my apartment window never stopped, and its rhythm on the sill sounded like footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. By dawn, I had convinced myself I wasn't going to him. I told myself I'd quit, pack the little I owned, and vanish before the city even remembered my name. I'd done it before, after all. Reinvention was my only real skill. But the thing about people like Dante Moretti is they don't ask twice. And beneath the fragile calm I'd built around myself all these years, I knew what it meant when men like him said, "You will." By noon, there was a black car parked outside my building. Not flashy, not loud, but unmistakably out of place. Polished to a mirror shine, idling with quiet menace. A man in a dark suit leaned against it, smoking. Not looking at anything in particular because he didn't have to. I didn't need a name to know who sent him. I stood at the window for 10 full minutes, watching the cigarette burn down to the filter, telling myself I could pretend I hadn't seen him. But when he raised his eyes to the window and nodded once, just once, I knew the pretending was over. So I went. The car smelled like leather and the faintest trace of gunpowder. The driver didn't speak. Neither did I. The silence between us felt like a weapon we both knew how to use. Outside, the city passed in gray streaks, the kind of dull daylight that made everything look washed out, unreal. Dante's office was inside a building I'd walked past 100 times without ever noticing. Discreet, unmarked. The kind of place that only existed for those who knew it did. The man at the door scanned me up and down, said something in Italian into his earpiece, and then stepped aside. The elevator ride was slow, deliberate, the hum of the motor oddly loud in the stillness. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked foreign, pale skin, tired eyes, hair pulled back in a neat knot that felt too formal for who I really was. For a moment I saw the woman I used to be staring back at me, the one who could kill a man before he blinked, the one who'd buried her own name. When the doors opened, Dante's world unfolded in silence and shadow. His office wasn't what I expected. No gold, no excess. Just black marble floors, bookshelves lined with leather, and a desk that looked like it had seen more confessions than a church. The air smelled faintly of espresso and smoke. He was there, of course, sitting behind that desk like it was a throne, jacket off, sleeves rolled to his forearms. There was a small cut on his temple from the night before, a thin line of dried blood he hadn't bothered to hide. Somehow that imperfection made him even more dangerous. "Elena," he said when he looked up, my name curling in his mouth like a secret. "You came." I didn't have much choice. He leaned back slightly, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Everyone has a choice. You made the right one." I stepped closer, refusing to let my nerves show. "If this is about last night, it is." He gestured to the chair in front of him. "Sit." I stayed standing. I did what anyone would do. "Anyone?" he echoed softly, tilting his head. "Anyone would throw a knife across a room with surgical precision and then pick up a Glock like it's part of her anatomy?" His tone wasn't mocking. It was curiosity disguised as threat. "I acted on instinct." "And where?" he asked, folding his hands together. "Does a waitress get those instincts?" The silence stretched. I could hear my pulse in my ears, that old familiar rhythm of fight or flight clawing at my ribs. "It doesn't matter where I got them," I said quietly. "It matters to me." He stood, and it was almost unfair how composed he looked. Tall, precise, not a hair out of place, even after everything that had happened. He walked around the desk slowly, like a predator that already knew you couldn't outrun it. "You saved my life," he said, stopping a breath away from me. "That means you're under my protection now." "I don't need your protection," he smiled without warmth. "Then consider it a debt. You saved me, so I owe you. But debts go both ways, Elena. I'll find out who you are, whether you tell me or not." I met his eyes, refusing to look away. "And if you don't like what you find?" His gaze softened in a way that made my stomach tighten. "Then I'll decide what to do with you." He said it like he was promising something, not threatening it. And that was somehow worse. I wanted to say something sharp, something that would cut through the tension, but my words tangled when he stepped closer, his presence filling the air between us until it was impossible to breathe. His cologne was faint, masculine, with that trace of smoke that clung to him like an afterthought. "Tell me," he murmured, almost gently. "Was that your first kill?" My breath caught. "No." The word slipped out before I could stop it. His eyes darkened, a glint of triumph there, as if I'd just handed him the first piece of a puzzle he intended to finish. "That's what I thought," he said softly, and then he moved away, as if he'd gotten what he wanted for now. He poured himself a drink from a decanter on the shelf, the amber liquid catching the dim light, and gestured toward the other glass. "You want one?" "I don't drink with men who point guns at people for a living." He chuckled lowly. "You'll find that limits your company in this city." He took a slow sip, eyes never leaving mine. "You're not afraid of me, are you?" I thought about lying, but there was no point. "No," I said, and it was mostly true. "I'm afraid of what you'll make me remember." That seemed to surprise him. He studied me in silence for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then quietly he said, "Whatever you've been running from, it found you the moment you walked into my restaurant." I wanted to deny it, to tell him I'd only ever wanted a quiet life, a clean slate. But deep down, I knew he was right. That night had awakened something I'd buried so deep it had almost died. He returned to his seat, folding his hands again, every movement deliberate. "I'm offering you a position," he said finally. "A position?" He nodded. "Security, personal. You'll work directly for me." I almost laughed. "You think I'm going to become your bodyguard?" "Not think," he said smoothly. "No." "You saved my life once, Elena. I prefer to keep people who do that close. I'm not interested." "Then consider what happens when the people who attacked me realize you were the one who interfered." The words hit me harder than I expected. He was right again. Of course he was. The men I'd fought last night weren't the kind to forget. I wasn't anonymous anymore. My face, my name, if I stayed, I was a target. He saw the flicker of realization cross my face and smiled that quiet, knowing smile. "You'll start tomorrow," he said simply, as if the conversation were over. "I haven't agreed to anything." "You don't have to." He stood again, walking to the window, his silhouette framed against the gray city beyond. "I'll have someone deliver your contract. Read it if it makes you feel in control." The arrogance in his calm made me want to scream. "You can't just decide my life for me." He turned then, eyes locking onto mine, voice soft but lethal. "Elena, someone already did, long before me. You just haven't realized whose game you're still playing." Something inside me twisted at that. Recognition, fear, fury, I couldn't tell. I wanted to walk out, to slam the door and never look back. But when I reached the elevator, my reflection in the mirror stopped me again. Because he was right. Running hadn't saved me before, and it wouldn't now. When the doors closed, I saw my own eyes looking back. Steady, haunted, and no longer entirely sure who they belonged to. As the elevator descended, one thought wouldn't leave me. Maybe Dante Moretti wasn't the danger. Maybe he was the mirror that finally showed me mine. I had always imagined that a prison would feel cold, metallic, full of echoes and iron bars, and men who laughed too loudly to remind themselves they were still alive. But Dante Moretti's mansion was not a prison like that. It was warm, immaculate, perfumed with cedar and money, its every hallway lined with art that probably cost more than everything I'd ever owned put together. And yet as I stood in its marble foyer, surrounded by silent men in tailored suits, I had never felt so trapped in my life. They called it a house, but it wasn't one. It was a fortress disguised as luxury. Massive black gates loomed at the entrance, guarded by men with earpieces and hands always hovering near their weapons. And beyond those gates sprawled an estate that felt like it existed outside time. Stone fountains murmuring softly under the weight of old secrets. Trimmed hedges so precise they might have been measured with rulers. and the faint scent of roses drifting through the heavy air, like the last remnant of innocence that had long since been buried here. A woman in a gray dress greeted me when I arrived, her expression polite but empty, the kind of face that said she'd learned not to ask questions if she wanted to keep breathing. She led me through a corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly, each step echoing against polished floors, until she opened a door and gestured for me to enter. "This will be your room," she said, voice soft, eyes never meeting mine. It was beautiful, too beautiful. High ceilings, cream walls, a chandelier that cast soft light across the velvet curtains, and a view of the garden that looked peaceful if you didn't know how many men with guns were hiding behind those hedges. There was a wardrobe already filled with clothes that weren't mine, all neatly pressed, all in muted tones of black, white, and gray. It felt less like a gift and more like preparation, as if someone had already decided who I was supposed to become here. "Mr. Moretti will see you in the study at 8, the woman added before leaving, her footsteps fading down the hall until I was alone with the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the uncomfortable realization that I'd stepped into a world that didn't plan to let me out. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the folded clothes, my thoughts running in circles. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to pack what little I had and slip through the servant's door while the guards changed shifts. But logic whispered that Dante Moretti didn't make idle threats. If he said the men who attacked him would come for me, they would. The only question was whether they'd find me before he did. By the time 8 o'clock arrived, I'd changed into a black blouse and slacks, clothes that fit so perfectly I almost hated them. I tied my hair back, looked in the mirror, and barely recognized myself. The woman staring back looked composed, controlled, like she belonged here. But her eyes, my eyes, were still wild underneath, like a cornered animal pretending to be tame. The study was at the end of another long corridor, guarded by a man whose nod was both respectful and warning. When I entered, Dante was standing by the window, sleeves rolled up again, hands resting casually in his pockets, as if this were his natural habitat, and I were just another piece of furniture he was deciding whether to keep. He turned when he heard me, and the corners of his mouth curved slightly. Not quite a smile, but close enough to make my pulse skip. "You came," he said. "You didn't really give me an alternative," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "That's not true," he said, walking toward me with that same deliberate grace that made every step feel like a statement. "You could have run, but you didn't." "Maybe I'm tired of running," I said before I could stop myself. His eyes softened, but only for a moment. "Then we understand each other." He gestured to a small table where 2 glasses of whiskey waited. I didn't move toward them, and he noticed, of course he did. Dante noticed everything. "You don't drink," he said. "Not when I don't trust who's pouring." That earned a faint laugh, low and genuine, though there was still something sharp behind it. "Fair enough," he said, then sat behind his desk, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Sit, Elena." I did. Not because he told me to, but because standing made me feel like I was preparing to run, and I was done running, at least for now. "I read your file," he said, leaning back. My pulse spiked. "What file?" He lifted one eyebrow, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "You didn't think I'd let someone with your skill set live under my roof without knowing who they are, did you?" I swallowed hard. "And what exactly did you find?" "Nothing," he said, and the word hung between us like a blade. "Which is more interesting than if I'd found something. You don't exist before 2 years ago. No social, no family, no trail. That takes effort. Or training." I forced a small shrug. "Maybe I'm just good at starting over." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "You're more than that. You're good at surviving." His tone was quiet, almost admiring, and it disarmed me more than his threats ever could. "What do you want from me?" I asked finally. He studied me for a long time before answering. Loyalty, he said, and honesty. I laughed once bitterly. You don't get both. Not from people like us. That made him smile, slow and dark. Maybe that's why I want you close. Something flickered between us then. An electricity neither of us wanted to acknowledge, but both of us felt. It was the kind of tension that lived in the air like smoke. Inevitable. Suffocating. Dangerous. He stood, walked around the desk, and stopped beside me. His presence was too much. Too near, the scent of him rich and unyielding. You'll train with my men in the mornings, he said quietly, as if nothing had changed. You'll shadow me at meetings until I decide you're ready to handle things alone. If anyone asks, you're part of my security detail. And when you decide you can't trust me, he smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then I'll decide what to do with you. I looked up at him, at the face that the city feared and women whispered about, and for a heartbeat I wondered what kind of man hid behind those walls he'd built so perfectly. You talk like you own everything you touch. He bent closer, voice low, smooth as sin. Only the things worth keeping. My breath caught before I could stop it, and the faintest flicker of satisfaction passed through his gaze before he turned and walked away, leaving me to wonder if I had just stepped into a deal I couldn't escape. That night, as I lay in the too soft bed staring at the ceiling, the silence of the mansion pressed down like a weight. Somewhere below, music played faintly, laughter from another world. His world, one I was now tangled in. I told myself I'd find a way out, that this was temporary, that I'd stay until the danger passed. But deep down, I already knew the truth. People don't leave Dante Moretti's world. They either become part of it or disappear beneath it. If I had known how heavy silk could feel, I might have refused to wear it. But refusing Dante Moretti was like trying to refuse the tide. It always came for you eventually, and when it did, it pulled you under until you couldn't tell if you were drowning or dreaming. The gown arrived that morning in a black box the size of a coffin, laid out on a bed of tissue paper that rustled like whispers when I touched it. Midnight blue satin, sleeveless, the fabric sliding like water through my fingers. There was a note tucked inside, one line in his precise handwriting. Wear this tonight, and try not to kill anyone unless you have to. I told myself I wouldn't go, that I wasn't his decoration, that I wouldn't play the part of some arm candy prop meant to charm his associates while pretending not to notice the blood beneath their fingernails. But when 8 o'clock came, I found myself in front of the mirror, fastening the silver clasp of the dress, feeling its weight settle around me like armor disguised as elegance. The driver took me to the mansion's ballroom, a place I hadn't seen before, and when the doors opened, the noise hit me like a physical thing. Laughter, crystal clinking. The low hum of a dozen conversations that all meant something darker than they sounded. The room glowed under chandeliers the color of moonlight, filled with men in black suits and women in gowns that shimmered like spilled champagne. It looked like a scene from another life, one I had once belonged to before I'd burned it down and run. Dante found me almost immediately, emerging from a crowd of admirers with that easy, lethal grace that made space wherever he walked. He was dressed in black, of course. No tie, the top buttons of his shirt undone just enough to make Sin look sophisticated. When he saw me, something flickered in his eyes. Approval, hunger, possession, maybe all three. You clean up well, he said softly, offering his hand. I'm not here to be seen, I murmured. He leaned close enough for his breath to brush my ear. You're here because every man in this room wants to know who you are, and I'd rather they know you belong to me than wonder if they can take you. My pulse tripped. I don't belong to anyone. Not yet. He smiled then, the kind of smile that could dismantle a person one heartbeat at a time, and led me toward the center of the room where the music swelled. We danced, if you could call it that. It wasn't really dancing. It was something closer to a negotiation, a slow, circling exchange of power where the space between us became the battleground. His hand rested against my lower back, firm, possessive, guiding me through the movements with precision that felt rehearsed, though I knew he didn't rehearse anything. His other hand held mine, fingers warm, the faintest pressure there like a reminder that control was something he granted, not shared. "You're trembling," he murmured. "I'm thinking," I said. "About running? About whether I'd make it past the gate." His mouth curved. "You wouldn't." The music shifted, slower now, darker. The chandelier light shimmered off the crystal glasses, and when I turned my head, I caught sight of faces I recognized from whispers. Men who ran guns, laundered fortunes, buried bodies. All of them watched Dante, some with respect, others with envy. And some, I realized, with calculation. That was when I saw him. A man near the bar, too still, too focused, pretending to sip champagne he hadn't touched. His posture was all wrong for a guest, too squared, too tense. His hand brushed the inside of his jacket once, casually, but I saw the outline beneath the fabric. A weapon. I stopped moving. Dante felt it immediately, his hand tightening on my waist. "What is it?" "Bar," I said under my breath, not looking directly. "Tall gray suit, no ring. He's not here to drink." Dante didn't turn his head, but I saw the flicker in his expression. Calm, calculating, dangerous. "You're sure?" "Positive." He released me just slightly, his fingers sliding from my back in a motion that might have looked intimate to anyone watching, but was really a signal. Across the room, two of his men began to shift, their movements disguised beneath the swirl of the crowd. The assassin moved first. His hand went into his jacket, fast and precise, but I was faster. Without thinking, I grabbed the nearest wine flute, snapped the stem clean against the edge of a table, and hurled it. The glass caught him across the face, cutting deep, just as he drew the gun. The crowd screamed, chaos exploding like fireworks. Dante's men were on him in seconds, pinning him against the bar before he could fire, the weapon clattering to the floor. The music died, replaced by shouts and the metallic sound of fear. I stood frozen for a moment, chest heaving, the broken stem still in my hand, blood beading on my fingers where the glass had cut me. Then Dante was in front of me again, calm amid the storm, his eyes burning like dark fire. He took the glass from my hand, tossed it aside, and caught my wrist, his thumb brushing the smear of blood there. "You really can't go one evening without saving my life, can you?" he said quietly, his tone half amusement, half something else entirely. "I didn't do it for you," I whispered. "No," he said, and there was a softness in his voice that unnerved me. "You did it because you don't know how not to." He turned to his men. "Get him out, quietly." Within minutes, the scene was being cleaned, blood mopped, glass replaced, the guests ushered toward the terrace with free champagne and reassurances that everything was under control. The orchestra struck up again, hesitant but obedient. Dante didn't let go of my hand. He led me out of the ballroom and down a quieter hall, the noise fading behind us until all that remained was the sound of our footsteps and the pounding of my heart. In the dim light, he stopped, turning to face me. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those eyes, were full of something raw, something I couldn't name. "You see things before anyone else does," he said. "Moves, danger, intent. That's not luck, Elena. That's training. I told you I used to work in rough places." He smiled faintly. "You keep saying that like you think I'll believe it." He stepped closer, his voice low, dark velvet. "Tell me the truth. Who taught you to fight like that?" "I don't talk about the past." "Then I'll find someone who will." He lifted my chin with one finger, forcing me to meet his gaze. "But until then," he said softly, "you stay by my side. You're safer where I can see you." My throat tightened. Safer, or easier to control? He didn't answer, only looked at me with that quiet intensity that made everything else fade away. Then after a moment he said, "Sometimes they're the same thing." And as he turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the golden glow of the corridor, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't afraid of Dante Moretti anymore. I was afraid of what I might become around him. I couldn't sleep that night, though the house was silent and the world outside wrapped in the soft hush of rain. Sleep had become a stranger lately, one I couldn't quite trust, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dante's face, the sharp cut of his jaw, the shadow in his eyes, the way his voice could slide through my thoughts and take root like a secret I'd never wanted to keep. I wandered the halls barefoot, the marble floors cold beneath my skin, the distant hum of the security system, the only sound breaking the stillness. Somewhere down the corridor, music was playing, low, slow, a haunting cello drifting through the darkness like smoke. I followed it, not because I meant to, but because it pulled at me, the way everything about him did. He was in the study, sitting in the half-light with a glass of whiskey in one hand and his other resting against the arm of the chair, like he owned the night itself. The firelight painted gold across his face, turning his expression into something both beautiful and dangerous, the kind of look that made you forget what fear was until it was too late. "You should be asleep," he said, without looking at me. "I could say the same to you," I replied, my voice softer than I meant it to be. He glanced up then, eyes catching mine, and for a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was heavy, electric, full of all the things we hadn't said, but both felt clawing under the surface. "Drink?" he asked finally, lifting the decanter. "No," I said, stepping closer. "I came to ask you why you brought me here." He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You already know why." "Because I saved your life?" "Because you made me curious." That startled me more than any threat would have. "Curious?" He stood then, moving toward me, with the kind of slow, deliberate grace that always made my heart forget how to beat. "I've seen killers," he said, voice low. "Cold, calculated, broken men who take lives like they're collecting coins. But you don't kill because you like it. You kill because it's what you were made for, and you hate that about yourself. You hide it behind aprons and small smiles and the illusion of normalcy. But when it comes down to it, you're more like me than you want to admit." I froze, every muscle tense. "You don't know me." "Then tell me," he said, stepping close enough that I could feel the heat of his body. "Who are you, Elena?" For a moment, I almost did. The truth burned on my tongue, aching to escape. The years of training, the missions, the name I'd buried. But then I saw the flicker of something in his gaze, that familiar hunger for control, and I shut the door on it again. "I'm no one," I whispered. He smiled, but it wasn't kind. "You're a terrible liar." He reached out then, slow enough for me to stop him if I wanted to, but I didn't. His hand brushed my jaw, fingers tilting my chin upward until I was looking straight into his eyes. They were endless, dark, dangerous, the kind of eyes you could fall into and never find your way out. "I don't trust people easily," he said quietly. "But when I do, I expect the same in return." "You don't want trust," I said, breath catching. "You want control." He didn't deny it. "Maybe they're the same thing to me." "Then you're sicker than you think." He laughed once, low and sharp, and the sound sent a shiver down my spine. "Probably. But so are you." His thumb traced the corner of my mouth. Slow, deliberate. I should have pulled away, I should have said no. Should have reminded him and myself that this was wrong, that nothing good came from people like us colliding. But when he leaned in, the space between us disappeared, and for one suspended heartbeat I forgot who I was supposed to be. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was hungry, brutal, desperate. A clash of defiance and surrender. I tasted whiskey and fire and something far too real. My hands found his shirt, clutching at the fabric as if it could anchor me, and his fingers tangled in my hair, pulling me closer until I could feel his heartbeat hammering against mine, unsteady, human, betraying the calm mask he always wore. When he finally pulled back, his breath was ragged, and his eyes looked like storm clouds about to break. "That's why I brought you here," he said, voice rough. "Because I wanted to know if you'd fight me or match me." "And which was that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Both." I stepped away, trying to steady myself, trying to remember why I had come here at all. "You think this means something," I said, forcing the words out. "But it doesn't. I'm not one of your conquests, Dante. I'm not another piece on your chessboard." He tilted his head, studying me with that quiet intensity that made everything else fade away. "You think I see you as a piece? That's all you see, people you can use." Something flickered in his expression, something raw and wounded that almost made me regret saying it. "Maybe that's true," he said softly. "But what if I told you that for once, I'm not sure which of us is using the other?" The question hit harder than I wanted it to. I turned away, needing distance, needing air. The fire crackled behind me, and I stared into it, trying to ignore the way my hands still trembled. "You should stay away from me," I said finally. "You don't know what I've done." "I don't care what you've done," he said, "only what you'll do next." His footsteps moved closer again, but he didn't touch me this time. He just stood behind me, close enough that I could feel his breath on my neck. "You can keep your secrets," he murmured, "for now. But know this, Elena. You can't hide from me forever. When I decide to open you up, I'll find every piece you've buried." I closed my eyes, hating that part of me wanted to believe him, hating that I wanted him to. When I finally turned to face him again, he was already watching me with that calm, unreadable expression, the one that made me feel like the rest of the world didn't exist. "Good night, Dante," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. He smiled faintly, but it wasn't amusement this time. It was something darker. "There's nothing good about it," he said, "not when you're walking away." I left before I could change my mind, my heart pounding, my skin still burning where his hands had been. The corridor felt endless, the silence suffocating. And yet beneath the chaos of emotion twisting inside me, one thought pulsed like a secret I couldn't shake. Maybe it wasn't chains that bound me to him. Maybe it was recognition. And that terrified me more than anything. I told myself I would keep my distance after that night, that I would remember who Dante Moretti was, and what kind of man he would always be. But distance inside his house was an illusion, because his presence filled every inch of it. The scent of his cologne lingering in the hallways, the echo of his voice through the marble corridors, the weight of his name pressing against the air like a shadow I could never quite step out of. Days blurred into each other in that place. Mornings began with training, endless drills, target practice, combat routines that brought back memories I'd spent years trying to bury. Dante's men didn't speak to me much. They watched instead, curiosity mixed with caution. I was the boss's new mystery, the woman who'd appeared from nowhere and saved his life twice. They didn't know whether to respect me or fear me, and so they settled for both. Dante rarely joined those sessions, but when he did, the world seemed to rearrange itself around him. He would stand at the edge of the training room, arms folded, eyes fixed on me with the kind of focus that made my pulse trip. He never spoke while I worked, but I could feel his gaze like heat on the back of my neck, assessing, learning, memorizing. When I made a perfect shot, he'd say nothing, just that faint curl of his lips, subtle and infuriating, as if my precision was proof of something he'd already known. But what I didn't expect was the quiet. The longer I stayed in his house, the more I realized that beneath the chaos of his empire, there was an emptiness to Dante Moretti that no amount of power could fill. He was surrounded by men, wealth, fear. But he lived like a ghost haunting his own kingdom. One afternoon I found him in the library. It was a vast room, all dark wood and towering shelves, sunlight filtering through tall windows in thin golden lines that dust motes drifted through like tiny secrets. He was sitting at the far end of the room, a glass of whiskey untouched on the table beside him, a book open in his lap but unread. "Did you ever finish it?" I asked, stepping inside. He didn't look up. "Finish what?" "The book. You've been pretending to read the same one for 3 days." That made him glance at me, the faintest hint of surprise softening his features. "You keep track of what I read?" "I keep track of everything," I said, moving closer. "Old habits die hard." He smiled without humor. "I doubt yours ever will." I sat across from him, crossing one leg over the other, the leather chair creaking softly beneath me. "You look tired." He tilted his head slightly. "You sound like you care." "Maybe I do," I said before I could stop myself. "Maybe I'm just trying to understand the man who keeps pretending he doesn't bleed." Something flickered in his eyes. Anger, maybe, or pain, or the kind of vulnerability he refused to acknowledge. "There's nothing to understand," he said quietly. "I built what I had to because no one else would protect what mattered." "And what mattered?" He didn't answer right away. He set the glass down, the sound sharp against the table, and leaned back in his chair, gaze distant now. "My brother," he said finally. "Luca. He mattered." I hadn't expected that. "What happened to him?"
He laughed softly, bitterly, the sound scraping something raw. "He betrayed me. Sold information to one of our rivals. I found out too late. Lost men, territory, money. But the worst part wasn't the loss. It was realizing he didn't even do it for power. He did it for revenge." "For what?" "For being born second," he said, voice low, eyes dark. "For always standing in my shadow. He wanted to prove he could be more than the spare heir. So he tried to destroy me, and when I gave him a chance to explain, he drew a gun instead." My breath caught. "You killed him?" He didn't look at me when he said, "I buried him myself." The quiet that followed felt endless. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, the sound of something burning down to its last embers. For the first time, I saw not the monster the city feared, but the man left standing in the ruins of everything he'd ever loved. "You think that makes me a monster?" he said finally. "I think it makes you human," I said softly. He looked up sharply, as if he hadn't expected mercy. "And what about you, Elena? What turned you into what you are?" I hesitated, the words pressing against my throat like broken glass. "The same thing," I said. "Loss. Except mine didn't come with a choice." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Who did you lose?" "My sister." The words came out brittle, barely audible. "She was killed. I was 16. They said it was an accident, but I knew better. It was deliberate. She got in the way of something I didn't understand back then. So I joined the people responsible, thinking if I got close enough, I could destroy them from the inside. But when I tried, I realized I'd become one of them instead." Dante's expression softened, and for a moment, the walls between us cracked. "You wanted revenge," he said quietly. "I wanted justice," I corrected, though the difference felt meaningless now. "But justice doesn't exist in our world, only power, and by the time I learned that, I'd already done things I can't undo." He didn't speak. He just looked at me. And in that silence, I felt something shift between us. Something dangerous. Something almost sacred. It wasn't pity. It was understanding.
Recognition. Two broken creatures staring at the reflection of themselves in someone else's scars. You know what the cruelest part is? I said. You start to forget who you were before the blood. The face in the mirror stops looking like yours. It's just someone else wearing your skin. He stood then, moving closer, until he was right in front of me, his shadow cutting across the light. You can't erase it, he said, but you can choose what comes next. And what comes next? His voice dropped, rough and certain. Loyalty, survival, me. I should have pushed him away. I should have reminded him that we were nothing alike, that his empire was built on the very kind of rot I'd once sworn to destroy. But when his hand brushed my cheek, I didn't move. His touch was warm, steady, and for a heartbeat, I let myself believe it wasn't poison. You think you can fix me? I whispered. He smiled faintly, shaking his head. No, Kara. I think you already know I'm the one who's broken. I stepped back before the moment could swallow me whole. Be careful, Dante. When two broken things collide, they don't fix each other. They shatter twice as fast. He watched me go, silent, unreadable. And I knew as I walked out that I'd just stepped past the line I could never uncross. Because I no longer wanted to escape him. I wanted to understand him. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. It began with silence, the kind that's too complete, too heavy, the kind that makes the hair on your arms rise because your body knows something your mind hasn't yet understood. I was walking down the corridor toward my room after another sleepless night when I noticed it. No distant music, no guards murmuring at their posts, no footsteps echoing on the marble. Just silence, deep and absolute, pressing in from every side. Then the lights flickered. I stopped, breath catching, that old instinct roaring awake like a sleeping animal that had just remembered how to hunt. The second flicker came with a low hum, a sound buried beneath the walls, electrical, rhythmic, wrong. Somewhere in the distance, glass shattered, and that's when I knew. They had found us. I turned and ran toward the east hall, the direction of Dante's study. As I moved, the world around me shifted from stillness to chaos. Shouts echoing. Gunfire cracking through the night. The air thickening with smoke and fear. Men were yelling orders in Italian, boots pounding against marble, and then the first explosion hit. The floor trembled under my feet, the sound like thunder tearing through the earth. A wall of fire erupted somewhere below, sending heat rolling up the corridor. I stumbled, caught myself, kept running. When I reached the study, the doors were already open, splintered from the blast. Dante was there, of course, standing behind his desk with a gun in one hand and fury in his eyes. "Stay down!" he barked, firing at the men flooding through the shattered window. I dropped to the floor just as bullets shredded the air above me, the scent of gunpowder burning sharp in my lungs. I crawled behind the desk, heart hammering, and looked up at him. He was bleeding, nothing major, a graze across his arm, but his expression didn't flinch. He looked like war itself, beautiful and terrible. "How many?" I shouted. "Too many," he said through clenched teeth. "Inside and out." He fired again, 2 shots, both precise. "They cut the power, breached the south wall. They'll be in the main hall any minute." I grabbed a fallen pistol from the floor and checked the magazine, half full. "Then we move." His gaze flicked toward me, dark and fierce. "You're not leaving my side." I wanted to argue, to tell him I wasn't his to protect. But the look in his eyes wasn't arrogance this time. It was something else. Something that almost looked like fear. So I nodded. We moved fast, weaving through corridors thick with smoke. The sound of distant gunfire guiding our path. Twice we had to duck behind statues as bullets ricocheted off marble, the air exploding into shards of stone and flame. The mansion I'd once thought indestructible was crumbling piece by piece around us. At one point, a man appeared at the end of the hall, weapon raised, but before Dante could shoot, I stepped forward and fired first. The recoil jolted up my arm, the shot clean and final. Dante looked at me for half a heartbeat, surprised, maybe proud, and then we kept moving. When we reached the grand staircase, the heat was unbearable. Flames licked up the walls, devouring paintings and silk drapes, smoke curling through the air like ghosts of everything this place had been. Bodies lay across the floor. His men, theirs, all blurred together in the chaos. We stopped at the landing, catching our breath. Below us, more enemies swarmed the hall, their shouts mixing with the roar of fire. Dante's men were outnumbered, pinned behind overturned furniture. He glanced at me. If we go down there, we die. Then we don't go down. I pointed toward the opposite wing. There's a service stair behind the kitchen. We can flank them. For a second, he just stared at me, eyes burning through the haze. Then he nodded. Lead the way. We ran. The corridor was half collapsed, the walls cracking under the strain of heat, but the service stairs were still intact. I led him through the narrow passage, our footsteps echoing in the confined space, the fire's glow chasing us from behind like a living thing. Halfway through, another explosion rocked the building, the shockwave knocking us both off balance. Dante grabbed my arm, pulling me back before a chunk of ceiling crashed where I'd been standing. The impact threw us together, his body against mine, heat and dust, and the sound of the world falling apart around us. You all right? He asked, his voice rough. Fine, I managed. You? He smiled faintly, blood trickling down his temple. Still breathing. When we finally reached the other side, the air was cooler, clearer. We emerged behind the kitchen, empty now, the chaos all concentrated near the main hall. From here, we could see the courtyard through the shattered glass doors. 3 SUVs, engines running, men outside shouting orders in a language I recognized, but hadn't heard in years. My stomach dropped. They're not just mercenaries, I said. They're from the DeLuca Syndicate. Dante's expression hardened. Luca's allies. The realization hit us both at the same time. This wasn't just revenge, it was an execution. I looked at him, at the blood on his shirt, the firelight flickering in his eyes, and something inside me made the choice before I could stop it. Get to the cars on the North Drive, I said. I'll hold them here. He turned on me instantly, furious. No. Dante, I said no. He grabbed my arm, dragging me closer. You think I'm letting you play martyr while I run? You don't get to decide who dies for me. Someone has to stay, I snapped, voice breaking. If they get past us, none of your men make it out alive. The fury in his eyes burned away, replaced by something raw. He let go of my arm, his hand lingering against my wrist. You're not dying for me, he said quietly. Not you. For a second, the world narrowed to just that moment. The fire, the smoke, his hand against mine, the weight of everything unspoken pressing between us. And then, from the hall behind us, the sound of footsteps, many, fast, coming closer. Dante raised his gun. Then we end this together. They came through the doorway in a wave of noise and fire, and we met them head on. I moved without thinking, every motion a blur of instinct and precision. I fired, ducked, rolled, reloaded, my mind silent and sharp. Dante fought beside me, brutal and efficient, the two of us moving as if we'd trained together for years. When the last man fell, the smoke was thick enough to choke on. I was shaking, blood in my hair, ash on my skin. Dante stood beside me, chest heaving, eyes wild with exhaustion and relief. The fire was closing in now, the mansion collapsing piece by piece. We have to go, I said. He nodded, grabbing my hand as we ran toward the back door, the heat licking at our heels. We burst out into the night air, coughing, gasping, the sound of sirens in the distance. Behind us, the mansion burned, a roaring inferno swallowing the world we'd both built our lives in. And as the flames rose higher, I realized what terrified me most wasn't that we might die tonight. It was that if we lived, if we survived this, I wasn't sure I'd ever want to leave him again. By the time dawn broke, the mansion was nothing but smoke and ash. The fire had eaten through the night like hunger itself, leaving behind only the twisted skeleton of what used to be Dante's empire, a blackened ruin against a gray sky. The sirens had faded hours ago, and the world was quiet again. Too quiet. The kind of silence that comes after destruction, when even the air seems afraid to move. We'd escaped through the woods, half blind from the smoke, half alive from sheer will. My lungs burned, my arms ached, and there was blood, his and mine, dried in uneven streaks across my skin. The forest was cold, damp, alive with the sound of crows picking over the carcass of what we'd left behind. Dante didn't speak for a long time. He walked ahead of me, his shirt torn, a gash along his side bleeding through the fabric. But his steps were steady. He was a man who refused to acknowledge pain, as if denial could bend the laws of his own body. When we finally reached the abandoned cabin nestled deep among the trees, he stopped, turned, and looked at me with eyes that had forgotten how to rest. "We stay here until my men regroup," he said, voice rough from smoke. I nodded, too tired to argue. The cabin was small, one room, one bed, one window that barely held its glass. But it was shelter, and for now, that was enough. While he checked the perimeter, I found the first aid kit beneath a half-collapsed cabinet and waited. When he came back inside, he shut the door, leaning against it for a moment as though holding the whole world back. I could see the tremor in his hand, the sweat clinging to his temple, the blood soaking through his side. "You need stitches," I said. "I've had worse." "Not from me." He gave a faint, exhausted smirk, but when he tried to remove his jacket, the movement made him wince. I crossed the space between us before he could protest and pressed my hand against his wound. "Sit down," I said. "Now." He obeyed, but not because I asked him to, because he was too tired to argue. I tore open the kit, cleaned the wound, threaded the needle with trembling fingers. My hands were steady enough to close his skin, but inside I was shaking. The intimacy of it was unbearable. The warmth of his breath near my face, the faint tremor in his chest, the way his eyes stayed fixed on me like I was the only thing anchoring him to this side of life. "Why didn't you run?" he asked quietly, breaking the silence. "When the fire started, you could have left me." I didn't look at him. "Because I've buried enough people." His gaze burned into me. "You're not like them," he said. "You don't kill for power. You kill to survive." "And you?" I asked. He was silent for a long time. "I used to tell myself it was survival too," he said finally. "But somewhere along the line I stopped knowing the difference." When the stitches were done, I wrapped the bandage around his torso. He caught my wrist as I tied it off, his grip gentle but firm. "You saved me again," he said, his voice rough, almost hoarse. "Do you make a habit of rescuing the damned?" "Only the ones who don't realize they are." He laughed softly, but there was no amusement in it. "Then you're wasting your time." "Maybe," I said. "But maybe I see something in you worth saving." His hand tightened on mine, and for a moment I thought he'd pull me closer. But instead, he let go and leaned back against the chair, eyes closing briefly. "You shouldn't," he murmured. "I destroy everything I touch." "So do I," I said. "Maybe that's why we understand each other." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, pulsing with something neither of us could name. The fire in the hearth crackled weakly, its light flickering across the walls, painting him in shades of gold and shadow. He looked older in that light, not in years but in weight, as though the past itself had settled on his shoulders. Finally, he opened his eyes. "Tell me," he said quietly. "Who were you before all this?" I hesitated. The truth had always been a weapon, and I'd learned long ago to never hand it to anyone. But after everything, the blood, the fire, the way he'd looked at me when he thought we might die together, I was too tired to keep lying. "My name isn't Elena Rossi," I said. At least it didn't used to be. My real name was Elena, Darko. Recognition flickered in his expression. "The Darko program," he said slowly. "The assassins they trained in the north." "Yes," he leaned forward. "You were one of them." "I was their experiment," I said. "They took orphans, trained them to kill, to disappear, to obey without question. When my sister died, I thought joining them would give me answers. But all it did was teach me how to forget her." His jaw tightened. "And you left." "I ran," I corrected. "The only thing I ever learned well." He was quiet for a moment, studying me like he was trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the ghost of the girl I used to be. "And that night at the restaurant," he said. "That wasn't an accident, was it?" I looked away. "No." He stood too suddenly, pain flickering across his face, but overshadowed by something sharper. Betrayal. Realization. "You were sent there," he said. "Yes," I whispered. "To kill you." The words hung in the air like smoke. For a long time, he didn't move. Then slowly he walked toward the window, staring out into the endless gray of the forest. "And yet you didn't." "I couldn't." "Because of pity?" "No." My voice cracked. "Because the more I watched you, the more I saw someone who'd already lost everything. Killing you wouldn't have been justice. It would have been mercy." He turned then, his eyes dark and unreadable. "And now?" "Now I don't know what's right anymore." He took a step closer, his expression hardening. "You should have told me. You would have killed me." He didn't deny it. "Maybe I still should." I met his gaze, my pulse racing. "Then do it." The challenge hung between us, alive and trembling. He stepped forward until we were inches apart, his hand lifting, fingers brushing against the side of my throat. For a heartbeat, I thought he'd tighten them. Instead, he let them rest there, his touch searing and fragile at once. "You think I can?" he whispered. "I think you already have," I said. "You just don't want to admit what it means." His hand fell away, and for a moment he looked lost, truly lost. Then he said, "We'll leave at nightfall. There's still a chance to take back what's mine." "And if we don't make it?" He smiled, faint and broken. "Then maybe we'll finally stop running from the ghosts we created." Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the promise of war. And as I watched him turn away, I realized that whatever happened next, I wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. I was fighting for him. And maybe, for the first time, for myself too. By the time the sun set, the world had changed. The sky bled red over the forest, turning the air into something that tasted like smoke and endings. Dante stood by the broken window of the cabin, loading his gun with quiet precision, his movements calm, deliberate, the way a man moves when he's already accepted his death. I sat across from him, the map of the DeLuca compound spread out on the table between us, the ink smudged, the edges burned. The plan was simple, suicidal, perfect. We'd strike at midnight. "They'll be expecting me," he said, sliding another magazine into his jacket. "They'll be expecting both of us," I corrected. He looked up, and for the first time since I'd told him the truth, I saw something like doubt flicker in his eyes. "You don't have to do this." I smiled faintly. "Neither do you." He stared at me for a long moment, and then softly he said, "You could still walk away. Start over again. I wouldn't stop you." I shook my head. There's no such thing as starting over. There's only surviving what's left. The silence that followed was the kind that said everything. Words couldn't. We both knew what this meant. There was no going back. Whatever waited for us at the DeLuca compound, victory or death, would end something in both of us. When the hour came, we left the cabin and drove through the forest in one of Dante's backup cars, headlights off. The road nothing more than a dark ribbon cutting through the trees. The night was cold, the kind that made your breath visible, and every exhale felt like a confession. The compound appeared on the horizon like a scar carved into the landscape. High fences, floodlights, armed guards pacing the perimeter. It was smaller than I remembered from my days with them, but that didn't make it less dangerous. Every inch of that place reeked of blood and obedience. We parked a mile away and went the rest of the way on foot, the forest swallowing our footsteps. My body moved with the rhythm I'd buried years ago, muscle memory pulling me back into the version of myself I thought I'd killed. Dante followed silently, his presence steady behind me, a shadow bound to mine. When we reached the outer fence, I cut through the wires with practiced ease, the metal snapping softly under the blade. We slipped inside, staying low, invisible. The guards moved in predictable rotations, just like I remembered, efficient, disciplined, deadly. "Third door on the right," I whispered. "That's where they keep their intel." Dante nodded, and together we slipped through the corridor, silent as ghosts. The compound was colder than I remembered, the walls sterile, the smell of disinfectant masking the stench of rot underneath. Every corner we turned was another memory I'd tried to erase, faces of people I'd trained with, laughter that had turned to screams. We reached the control room without incident. I hacked into the main terminal, fingers flying across the keys. "Give me 2 minutes," I murmured. "I can pull their files, locations, contacts, everything." Dante stood guard by the door, gun raised, every muscle taut. The screen flickered to life, lines of data scrolling faster than I could read. For a second, everything felt almost possible. Then the alarm blared. "Shit," I hissed. "They've got motion sensors wired to the backup grid." The hallway erupted with footsteps and shouts. Dante fired first, his shots echoing down the corridor, precise and controlled. I yanked the drive from the port, stuffed it into my jacket, and grabbed another gun from the table. "Go," he shouted. We ran. The compound was alive with chaos now, guards pouring from every direction, red lights flashing, sirens screaming through the night. Bullets ripped through the air, sparks flying off metal as we ducked behind cover. I returned fire, each shot clean and final, the old rhythm returning too easily, too naturally. We reached the courtyard when the explosion hit. A flash of orange tore through the east wing, throwing us both to the ground. My ears rang, my body numb. I blinked through the dust and saw Dante struggling to his feet, blood running down his temple. "Keep moving," he yelled. I pushed myself up, my lungs screaming, my hands shaking. We ran again toward the outer gate, but before we reached it, a voice stopped us cold. "Well, isn't this poetic?" it said. I froze. I knew that voice. From the shadows stepped a man I hadn't seen in years, Marco DeLuca, the one who'd trained me, the one who'd made me into what I was. His hair was streaked with gray now, but his smile was exactly the same, sharp, cruel, the smile of a man who thought he'd built gods. "Elena," he said, drawing out my name like an old song. "My best creation. I wondered when you'd come home." Dante raised his gun instantly, but Marco just laughed. "You really think I'd let you walk in here without insurance?" The sound of boots behind us. We turned. Half a dozen of his men stood there, guns drawn, trapped. "Drop it," Marco said. Dante didn't move. "You should have stayed buried, old man." Marco's smile widened. "And you should have killed her when you had the chance." He turned to me. Tell me, my little prodigy, did he ever ask what happened to his brother? I went still. What are you talking about? Marco's eyes glittered. You didn't tell her, did you, Dante? Didn't tell her who gave me the intel that got Luca killed? Dante's face went pale, the gun in his hand lowering just slightly. You're lying. Am I? Marco said softly. Or did you think I wouldn't recognize the girl who carried the message? The one who delivered the location that led me straight to your brother's men? The world tilted. My breath caught. No, I whispered. No, that's not possible. Dante looked at me, eyes dark and disbelieving, and for the first time I saw something break in them. You... I didn't know, I said desperately. They told me it was a courier job. I didn't... But it was too late. The words hung between us. Poisoned, irreversible. Marco's laughter filled the courtyard. You see? The same girl who saved you twice is the one who killed your blood. You're welcome. The next second was chaos. Dante turned and fired, rage igniting in his eyes, and I moved before I could think, ducking behind cover as bullets ripped through the air. I took out 2 of Marco's men, but the rest kept coming. Dante was hit once, twice, shoulder, leg, but he didn't stop. Marco went down with a final shot to the chest, his laughter dying on his lips. The silence that followed was deafening. I crawled to Dante's side. He was on his knees, blood soaking through his shirt, his gun slipping from his fingers. Don't you dare, I said, grabbing him, shaking him. Don't you dare die on me. He looked at me, his eyes dark and glassy. You killed him, he whispered. You killed my brother. Tears blurred my vision. I didn't know, Dante, I swear I didn't know. He laughed, soft, broken. Fate's funny like that. His hand came up, trembling, brushing my cheek. Get out of here, he said, before they finish what we started. I'm not leaving you. You already did, he murmured. His eyes closed, and for one terrible moment I thought the world had ended right there in my hands. The world didn't end with the explosion of a gunshot, or the hiss of a dying man's breath, but with the sound of rain falling on blood-soaked ground. Steady, indifferent, as if the sky had already seen too much of us to bother mourning anymore. I remember holding Dante's body in that courtyard, my hands slick with his blood, my throat raw from screaming his name, though I knew, even before he went still, that he was slipping away. There was a quietness to death that I'd forgotten, a kind of cruel peace that makes you realize the world keeps breathing even when the person you love stops. I don't know how long I sat there. The compound burned around us, men shouting, fire devouring the walls that had held so many ghosts. But I didn't move. I couldn't. I stared at his face. The same man who'd terrified a city, who'd kissed me like sin, who'd seen through every mask I'd ever worn. And all I could think was that he looked younger now, softer, almost free. His blood was warm on my hands, but cooling too quickly. And in that slow, fading heat, something inside me began to break apart. When I finally stood, I did it because I had to. The living always do. I took his gun, his ring, the drive from my jacket pocket, and I left him there because staying meant dying. And he'd told me to go. I didn't remember walking through the gates or the forest or the fields beyond, only that by the time the sun rose again, I was miles away, barefoot, burned, and covered in ash. For 3 days, I hid. The drive I'd stolen was the only thing that kept me from unraveling completely. Inside it was everything Dante had been fighting for. The names of the men who'd betrayed him, the money trails, the allies who'd turned enemies. It was the skeleton key to the empire he'd built, and the one that had tried to destroy him. And part of me, the part he'd awakened, the part that had learned to love him even when she shouldn't, knew I couldn't let it die with him. So I didn't. I went underground, changed my name again, moved like smoke through the veins of a dying city, following the ghosts he'd left behind. Each night I hunted another man from the list, watching their fear bloom when they realized the waitress from La Maravilla had become something far worse. I thought revenge would feel like closure, but it didn't. It felt like slow suffocation, like drowning in someone else's sins until you couldn't tell which were yours anymore. Sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I still heard him. His voice, low and rough, saying my name the way no one else ever would. Elena. The way he said it had always sounded like a promise and a warning all at once. Weeks passed, maybe months. Time didn't mean much anymore. The news whispered about the Moretti collapse, about the mysterious deaths of the DeLuca loyalists, about how no one had seen the boss's body. Some said he'd burned in the fire. Others swore he'd escaped, wounded, hiding somewhere, waiting for the right moment to return. I didn't believe any of it. You can't kill a legend by burning down his house. But a man like Dante, he wasn't made to fade quietly. He'd either rise from the ashes or haunt them forever. One night I found myself back in the city, standing outside what was left of La Maravilla. The restaurant was gone now, boarded up, the gold letters of its sign half melted, the scent of smoke still faint in the air. I don't know why I went there. Maybe because it was where everything began, or maybe because I wanted to feel close to him one last time. I sat on the curb, the city lights flickering like tired stars, and I thought about the woman I'd been before that night. The quiet waitress who thought she could outrun her past, who didn't know that salvation sometimes comes disguised as ruin. Funny place to haunt, a voice said behind me. My heart stopped. It couldn't be. I turned, slowly, afraid that if I moved too fast he'd disappear like smoke. But he was there. Dante. He stood in the alley's mouth, coat dark with rain, hair longer now, a faint scar tracing his jaw where a bullet had kissed him, but failed to claim him. His eyes met mine, and in them was everything I'd ever known. Anger, exhaustion, hunger, and that quiet, dangerous tenderness that had always undone me. You're supposed to be dead, I whispered. He smiled faintly. You sound disappointed. I buried you. You should have known better than that. I stood, my legs trembling, my voice breaking. You saw the blood. Not all of it was mine, he said. Your bullet to Marco's chest saved me. Barely. My men found me after. You left. I told them to keep it quiet. To let the world think I'd burned with the rest. Why? I demanded. Why disappear? Because I had to see what the world would do without me, he said. And because I needed to know what you'd do without me. I laughed, half sob, half rage. You think this is a game? No, he said softly. It's the end of one. He stepped closer, slow, careful, as if afraid I'd vanish this time. You hunted them, didn't you? I finished what you started. He nodded once, eyes dark and unreadable. Then it's done. I shook my head. No, Dante, nothing's ever done with us. For a long time, we just stood there in the rain, the world quiet around us except for the sound of water hitting concrete. When he reached out, his hand hesitated before it touched my face, as if he was asking permission to exist again. And I let him. His fingers were cold, his touch trembling. But it was real. And for the first time in months, so was I. You should hate me, I said. Maybe I do, he whispered, but it doesn't change what I want. And what's that? He leaned closer, voice low, almost breaking. You. The woman who should have killed me and didn't. The one who looked at the devil and saw something worth saving. I wanted to tell him that saving him had destroyed me, that I'd lost everything trying to become the person he believed I could be. But the words tangled in my throat. Because even now, even after everything, I couldn't hate him. I could only love him in the way that fire loves oxygen, completely, dangerously, without reason. He kissed me then, slow and desperate. Rain running down our faces, washing away the ash and the ghosts. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't redemption. It was survival, the only kind we knew. When we finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "What happens now?" I asked. He smiled, small and tired. "Now we disappear. For real this time. And after that?" "After that," he said, "we see if people like us can learn how to live without killing what we love." I wanted to believe him. Maybe I did. As we walked away from the ruins of the restaurant, hand in hand, the rain falling harder now, I looked back one last time. The street was empty, the city silent, and for the first time since I could remember, I didn't feel like I was running anymore. Maybe the waitress died in that fire. Maybe the assassin did too. What remained was something else entirely. Someone new, someone forged in blood and forgiveness. Dante once told me fate was just another word for what we deserve. I think he was wrong. Fate is what's left when everything else burns away. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it gives you a second chance to rewrite the ending.